Back when I was in high school, I had a history teacher, and he would occasionally just say, okay, put your pencils down, it's story time. And you'd end up with this 20-minute story, and it would be funny and thoughtful and thought-provoking. And you wouldn't even realize you were learning until you were thinking about it later, and you're like, gosh, I never knew that about the Franco-Prussian War. Or, I never knew there was a Franco-Prussian War. Not you guys, of course. You guys are experts in the Franco-Prussian War. If there's one thing I know about this congregation, you know your Franco-Prussian wars. All right. But that's what I want to do today. I want to say it's story time. And I want to just listen to the story that we just heard read and just examine what's going on. It is just a funny and thought-provoking and a little bit of a mind-melting story. So, Mike, if you want to throw up that first slide for me. So this story happens. Jesus and his disciples are walking through Jerusalem. And they see this guy who has been blind since birth. And the disciples ask this very reasonable question in their minds. Why is this guy blind? Did he sin or did his parents sin? Because in their minds, in their mental framework, what they're thinking is somebody had to have messed up. Somebody had to have done something. Either this guy, before he was born, sinned. Maybe he was there in his mother's womb for 8.5 months and said, you know what, when I get out of here, I got a few words for God. Okay? Or maybe his parents did it. In either way, it's tough for the disciples to figure this out because it's weird to think that somebody sinned before they were born, and it's weird to think that this person is being punished for somebody else's sin. But either way, they can't figure it out. So they say, Rabbi, what do you say? And Jesus answered, go ahead and throw up that next slide. Neither this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. And Jesus goes on to say that, look, I am the light of the world. And when night is coming, when no one can work. But as long as I'm here, I'm the light, and we're going to work. And then what he does is he spits on the ground, makes some mud, puts it on the guy's eyes, and says, go wash in the pool of Siloam. And so the guy's like, okay. Goes down to the pool, washes his face, and boom, he can see. Now here's where the story gets funny. Nobody can figure out what to do with him. When he's there, all his people who knew him when he was a beggar are like, is this the guy? I don't know. He looks like the guy, but he's not the guy. And you just read through there, and you're like, I don't know. Really? Are you sure? And it's kind of, you can just feel everybody trying to make sense of it. And so eventually this guy ends up in front of the Pharisees, the religious authorities. And they keep asking him, how did this happen? And he's like, I don't know. This guy just put mud on my eyes, tells me to go wash my face. I go wash my face and I can see again. What do you want me to do with this? And this is where it gets entertaining. Because the Pharisees don't know what to do with this. And I want to have a little bit of sympathy for the Pharisees here. Now, if you're one of those people who has been growing up in church and you've been going to Sunday school since you were yay tall and you did Bible study in the whole 9 yards, you were raised to know the Pharisees are the bad guys. And everybody always thinks the Pharisees are the bad guys. And let's be honest, they did some bad stuff. But let's have a little sympathy here. Because they're trying to make sense out of this. You see, on one hand, they're saying, okay, well, this guy did this thing and this miracle happened, and obviously this is from God because we can't heal anybody. This guy who had been blind all his life, he can see now. So this would seem to think it's from God. But on the other hand, they're looking at this, but he did it on the Sabbath, and he did work on the Sabbath. And you might sit there thinking, well, yeah, so? But for these guys 2,000 years ago, they're looking at this question and they're saying, look, 1,400 years ago, God gave Moses and the people of Israel these rules. And these are the rules we're supposed to live by. And the rules honor God, and we don't want to dishonor God by working on the Sabbath. And they said, we are going to make sure that we get this right, and we're not going to mess around and disrespect God. Because for them, working on the Sabbath wasn't just you're supposed to rest. It was a sign of disrespect to God if you worked on the Sabbath. It was going against his word, going against his laws, going against what he said. And so they're like, what are we supposed to do with this? And then they drag in the guy's parents. And the poor guy's parents are like, we don't know. Ask him. He's old enough. You can just see his parents are just like, what are we supposed to do? We don't know. So they just hang out there. And eventually, the Pharisees and everybody else throw this guy out. Okay? I love this line. You were born in utter sin, and yet you would teach us. And they cast him out. Gonna have one of the confirmation kids make that their verse for this fall. Okay? So they're upset with him. And they're doing that very human reaction. When they don't understand and they can't make sense of things, they take it out in anger. They take it out in frustration. It's like they just don't know. And so the end of the story, the end of chapter 9, Jesus heard they cast him out, and he found him and said, do you believe in the Son of Man? And this guy answers, and who is he, sir, that I might believe in him? And Jesus said to him, you have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped. And Jesus said, for judgment has come into this world, for those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. What Jesus is laying down is that very simple and thoughtful precept which echoes throughout all the gospel, that so often the people who think they know everything, the people who think they're in charge, are the one who can't see. And those who are seeking God find him. And my question for you today is, where do you find yourself in this story? Because like any great piece of literature, you should be able to see yourself in multiple parts of this story. These are relatable characters, relatable people, going through a different set of issues, but at the core, their humanity is the same as us today. So who do you empathize with? Who do you see yourself as? And let me give you a little hint. It's not Jesus, okay? If you go through the Bible and you're reading like, oh, I'm totally like Jesus, you just need to sit down and think about things for a while, okay? I say that because I love you. Don't do that, okay? But maybe you're like the Pharisees, and you're trying to make sense of things. And you've got a framework for how God is supposed to be and how things are supposed to operate, and you're like, but it's not working out that way. I said the right things, I did the right things, and now it's not happening the way it's supposed to. And I don't know what to do with it. So often we get cultural issues entangled in things. I often get these emails or phone calls, and it's like, what does your church think about X? And it's a way of people processing what the congregation is about. And when we had first started out in ministry, we were down in Texas, and we were meeting in a hotel ballroom, and our music department was one guy with an acoustic guitar. And somebody calls us up and says, well, what's your worship like? And we're like, well, we have one guy with an acoustic guitar. And they're like, well, yeah, but you're doing Bach, right? And I'm like, no, we have one guy with an acoustic guitar. Well, yeah, Bach is great, but we can't do that. And what they were trying to do is they were trying to process what worship is supposed to be like. And the framework just didn't make sense for that context. And I can give you a half dozen other examples of those phone calls and emails that I get on a yearly basis. And the problem is God is bigger than our framework. And God will choose to use people that we don't expect. And God will choose to work in ways that we don't expect. And maybe you're like the parents in this, and I kind of empathize with them because they're like, we don't know. He was blind, now he sees. We just hang out, ask him. In so much of our life these days, we feel like we're just trying to get by. We're just trying to keep our head down and not say anything that makes people mad. So often we just want to not get in trouble. But the person I really want to focus on here is the man who was born blind. And to talk about this guy who was born blind, I want to go to somebody else. I want to go to a gentleman who was born in 1725 near London. A gentleman by the name of John Newton. See, Newton was born into a family where his father was a shipping merchant. And his mother had wanted him to become a clergyman, but it didn't happen. And so he joined his father's ship as an apprentice at the age of 11. And as a youth, he began a pattern of keeping very close to death. And as a sailor, he denounced his faith. And he said, like an unwary sailor who quits his port just before a rising storm, I renounce the hopes and comforts of the gospel at the very time when every other comfort was about to fail me. And he was so disobedient as a sailor in his father's company that he got pressed into the Royal Navy. And then after he was with the Royal Navy for a bit, he escaped that, ran away, and began a career as a slave trader. And so he was on a slave ship, and he openly mocked the captain of the slave ship. And when he's on the ship, the Greyhound, he gained notoriety as being one of the most profane men that the captain had ever met. Little sidebar. Sailors are not exactly known for clean language, and if you are remarkable for your use of profanity on a slave ship in the 1700s, how bad do you have to be? I really spent some time pondering that this week. Probably more than I should have. But this guy was habitually swearing to the point where he's shocking slave traders. That is a high bar to clear, okay? Okay, so anyway, so he's spending time on this slave ship, the Greyhound. And in 1748, there's a violent storm that comes up, and the sea was so rough, it swept overboard a crew member who was standing right where Newton had been just a moment before. And as the storm is going on, they are expecting to be capsized, and eventually Newton and another crewman tied themselves to the ship's pump to keep from being washed overboard, working for several hours. And at one point, as he tells the captain, if this will not do, then the Lord have mercy upon us. And he spends 11 hours tied to that pump. A couple weeks later, the ship and the starving crew land in Ireland. And after several weeks, he'd been reading stuff by Thomas à Kempis and other saints. And he kept pondering his line, Lord, have mercy upon us. And he had spent all this time not only neglecting his faith, but mocking people of faith, deriding and denouncing God as a myth. And then he comes to believe that God had sent him a profound message and began to work through him. Now, his conversion was not immediate. It's not like the scales fell from his eyes. But over the course of time, he leaves slave trading. He doesn't sail anymore. And eventually he becomes a clergyman. And as he was a clergyman, he began to write songs. And in the year 1788, after 34 years after he retires from the slave trade, he broke his long silence on the subject. And he wrote this pamphlet called Thoughts Upon the Slave Trade. And in that he apologized, a confession which comes too late. It will always be a subject of humiliating reflection to me that I was once an active instrument in a business at which my heart now shudders. And he became an ally of William Wilberforce, and he lived long enough to see the British Slave Trade Act of 1807, which outlawed slavery in the British Empire and slave trading. Now, you might not know the name John Newton, but one of the things he wrote was the song Amazing Grace. Those words, which we all know, whether you've ever been in church or not, that I once was blind, but now I see. And those beautiful words, that amazing grace that saved a wretch like me. And I share that story with you because it is such a powerful example of how we are like that blind man. None of us deserve the grace that we got. None of us deserve to be saved. Think about the blind guy in the story where Jesus interacts with him. Was he doing anything to deserve being saved? No, he's just sitting there begging by the side of the road, blind. And Jesus comes up, puts mud in his eyes, and says, go wash. Didn't do anything, didn't ask for it. Think about Newton running from God, being a slave trader, denouncing God, mocking God, and yet God reaches out to him. Think about our story. Do any of us deserve grace? There is a beautiful line in Romans where it says that it is only through the power of the Holy Spirit that we can say Jesus is Lord. And you might have been here decades. You might have done all the good works. You might have done everything. But you only got to that point because of that grace that saved you to begin with. And if you sit here and you think, but no, I'm a good person, then you're just like the Pharisees trying to wrap yourself above God's law. Now, there's a flip side to this, in that we need to look around us and wonder who are these blind people who God is working on. Who are these people that we don't expect, we don't think anything good is ever going to come out of, but God is bringing that grace into their lives. Russell Moore said something, I probably read this 6-7 years ago, and it has stuck with me ever since. It is, who are those next people who are going to get saved? And he wrote very powerfully, look, the next Augustine of Hippo might be lying face down in a gutter right now. The next Mother Teresa might be in county lockup right now. The next Martin Luther might be selling crack somewhere. It is a call for us and a remembrance for us. And well, I got to tell you this. I'll give you a little preview of what's going to happen on Wednesday. We are going to spend Lent praying for the lost, praying for those people who don't yet know Jesus, those people we love, those people we care about, who don't know him yet. Because this is a time for remembering how God has worked in our lives, remembering the way he has moved powerfully in our lives, and hearing those stories and saying, yes, Jesus did these amazing things, Jesus did these wonderful things, and he will continue to do these things. He will continue to open the eyes of the blind, continue to save wretches like you and me, and continue to bring forth joy in everything that he does. Amen.